For 3,000 years, the known galaxy had operated under a single truth. Humanity was an accident. A fortunate one, perhaps, but an accident nonetheless. The ancient Valorian collective had discovered them barely 5 centuries ago, scattered across a single planet in the outer spiral, and the elite species of the cosmos had made their assessment quickly. Humans were adaptive. Humans were ambitious. Humans were unreliable. No species in the Galactic Federation took humanity's military ambitions seriously. When Earth's government announced the development of a deep space fleet, the Ethereal Council had actually laughed, a crystalline, resonating sound that still echoed through diplomatic channels. The Krell Empire dismissed it as fantasy. Even the supposedly neutral merchant guilds had publicly stated that any human military ventures would likely collapse under the weight of their own incompetence. After all, humanity had only been in space for 230 years. They were children playing with technology they'd scarcely invented themselves, piloting ships with borrowed designs and salvaged components. What could they possibly accomplish? Then came the day the Valorians sent their ultimatum. And everything humanity had secretly built, everything they had quietly prepared for, everything they had been mocked for pursuing, suddenly became the only thing standing between the galaxy and eternal darkness. In the frozen observation station above Mercury, Admiral Sarah Chen stood before a window that showed nothing but black void and distant stars. Her hands were steady as stone. Behind her, 3,000 reports scrolled across digital displays. Her officers stood at attention, waiting for her command. And in that moment, with the weight of 2 billion human lives pressing down on her shoulders, the Admiral smiled. The galaxy was about to learn what happens when you underestimate a species that has nothing left to lose. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, encoded in a frequency that had been dark for 17,000 years. Admiral Sarah Chen was reviewing supply manifests when Lieutenant Marcus Webb burst into her office without knocking. The younger man's face was pale, his breath coming in short gasps as if he'd run all the way from the communications tower. Before Sarah could reprimand him for the breach of protocol, Marcus placed a data crystal on her desk with trembling fingers. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "you need to hear this. Alone." Sarah's first instinct was to throw him out. Military discipline existed for a reason, and sloppy protocol had destroyed more careers than incompetence ever could. But something in Marcus's eyes stopped her. She'd been commanding the Earth Defense Fleet for 12 years, and she'd learned to read the difference between panic and genuine dread. This was the latter. She activated the crystal. What played across her officer's speakers wasn't a transmission meant for human ears. The initial broadcast was an ethereal standard, the universal language of the galactic elite, but the AI translation came through clearly enough. The words made her blood turn to ice. All Valorian-aligned species. All recognized members of the collective. A crisis has emerged that requires immediate military response. The void entity has breached the Cascade Barrier. It is moving toward ethereal space with unknown intent. All military assets must be mobilized for containment. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. All defensive platforms in sectors 1 through 7 are to be activated. All planetary shield systems are to be brought online. All member species are expected to commit 40% of their available military forces to the defensive line within 30 rotations. Failure to comply will result in collective sanctions. We are facing extinction. We are facing the void. The message looped 3 times before Sarah stopped it. She sat in silence, her mind processing information that should have been impossible. The void entity was mythology, science fiction, a bogeyman that ancient civilizations had invented to explain mass extinctions and the mysterious disappearance of entire star systems. No one actually believed it was real. "How did we intercept this?" Sarah asked quietly. "Accident, ma'am," Marcus replied. His voice had found some stability, though his hands were still shaking. Deep space sensor array in the Terminus system picked up a fringe echo of the transmission. "It wasn't meant for us. They don't even know we can hear it." But the encryption pattern was weak enough for our quantum processors to crack. Someone at that relay station must have been careless. Or, he trailed off, but Sarah finished the thought. Or the Valorians no longer cared if humanity knew, because they no longer expected humanity to matter. Sarah stood and walked to the window of her office. From the Mercury station, she could see Earth in the distance, a blue-green marble that most of her fleet's personnel had never actually visited. Over 3 billion people lived there. Another 2 billion were scattered across the solar system. Miners on asteroids, scientists on research stations, families building homes on the terraformed edges of Mars and Venus. Humanity had built something extraordinary in the 2 centuries since first contact with the galactic powers. They'd gone from being a curiosity to being a recognized member of the collective, albeit one that no major civilization took seriously. Every other species had dismissed their military ambitions as adorable. The Valoronians had literally patted human diplomats on the head during the last collective summit. The Krell had offered to help manage human military development, which was their polite way of saying they'd colonize Earth and remove the problem. The Ethereals had simply ignored humanity's defense proposals, as if humans lacked the capacity to even understand real military strategy. So humanity had built in secret. The Earth Defense Fleet had been her life's work. Over 200 ships, each one a masterpiece of human engineering. Some designs were human original, innovations born from necessity and unconventional thinking. Others were improvements on designs borrowed from species humanity traded with. But every vessel, every weapon system, every engine core had been built by human hands and human minds. The Valorians and their allies had no idea the fleet existed. The Ethereals had never bothered to check. That was about to become the most catastrophic mistake in galactic history. "Get me General Patterson," Sarah said, still staring at Earth. "And wake up everyone on the command roster. I don't care if they're on leave or recovering from surgery. I want the entire core leadership in the war room within the hour. Tell them it's not a drill." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. He moved toward the door, then hesitated. "Ma'am, there's something else. The timestamp on that transmission, it was sent 6 rotations ago. The void entity has a 20-rotation approach window before it hits the ethereal core systems. And according to intelligence reports we've been seeing from collective diplomats, no single member species has committed more than their required military assets. Everyone is too busy protecting their own territories. Ethereals are counting on numerical superiority. But if that entity is really as dangerous as the legends suggest, he didn't need to finish." Sarah understood the mathematics of extinction. The Ethereals and their allies were going to get slaughtered. And when they fell, there would be nothing standing between the void entity and Earth but vacuum and distance. Within 60 minutes, the war room was full. 13 officers, the brightest military minds humanity had produced, gathered around a holographic display showing the current positions of known galactic powers. General James Patterson, Sarah's second-in-command and one of the few remaining veterans from the first contact period, was the last to arrive. He was ancient by modern standards, 178 years old thanks to extended life treatments, and his expression was grim. "You called us for something other than glory," he said, settling into his seat. It wasn't a question. Sarah briefed them in clinical terms, removing emotion from the data. The void entity was real. The Ethereals had known about it for millennia but had kept it secret, likely believing they could contain it. They had failed. A military response was being mobilized, but it would be insufficient. The Ethereals had made the fatal calculation that they alone could manage the problem without depleting their own defenses too severely. They had been wrong. "What does this mean for us?" Captain Diana Ortega asked. She commanded the strike frigate contingent, and her mind was always practical. Even if the Ethereals lose, it will take months for the entity to work its way through their territory. We have time to mobilize civilian evacuation. To where? Sarah asked quietly. Mars? Venus? The asteroid colonies? There's nowhere in the solar system that would survive if this entity makes it past ethereal space. Our only advantage is distance and the time we have right now. But that won't be enough against something that can destroy entire civilizations. "You're suggesting we intervene," General Patterson said. His voice was carefully neutral, but Sarah could hear the weight of his words. They all could. The silence that followed was profound. Humanity intervening in a galactic military crisis was on the level of an insect sending fighter jets to defend a city. It was absurd. It would be seen as arrogance at best, suicide at worst. But Sarah had never been good at conventional thinking. "I'm suggesting we do what humans do best," she said. "I'm suggesting we do the impossible. We have 217 operational combat vessels. Our weapon systems are unconventional by galactic standards, which means the entity won't be optimized to defend against them. Our tactical doctrines are human, adaptable, unpredictable, based on improvisation rather than ancient protocols. The Ethereals fight with mathematical precision, predicting everything 17 moves in advance. The entity, if it's destroyed civilizations before, might be designed to counter that, but it won't be designed to counter us. She brought up the fleet specifications on the hologram, names scrolled past: the Valiant, the Unbroken, the Last Stand, the Defiant. Each one was a ship of the line, built with the sweat and ingenuity of humanity's best. We jumped to ethereal space, Sarah continued. We hit the entity with everything we have. We don't fight like they fight. We don't follow the rules they've been using for 3,000 years. We improvise, we adapt, we survive. And if we're going to die anyway, because that's what happens if the entity reaches Earth, then maybe we die doing something that matters. General Patterson studied her for a long moment, then he smiled, a rare expression that made his ancient face look almost youthful. You're going to get us all killed, Admiral. Probably, Sarah agreed. But the alternative is watching our planet die while we huddle in bunkers. I won't accept that. Earth has given everything to humanity. The least we can do is stand on its behalf. She looked around the table at her officers, men and women who had trained their entire lives for moments they never thought would come. Who had built technology everyone mocked as primitive? Who had kept humanity's military secret, not out of shame, but out of necessity, because they had always known this day might arrive? I'm taking this to the civilian government, Sarah said, but I need to know right now. Do I have my military with me? Will you stand? 13 officers rising from their seats in a silent gesture of commitment. Diana Ortega was first. Then the commander of the engineering corps, the head of tactical operations, the communications director. Marcus Webb, who had brought her the message in the first place, stood as well, though technically he had no seat at the table. General Patterson was the last to stand. He walked over to Sarah and placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. Remember what it means to be human, he said quietly. We don't win because we're the strongest. We win because we refuse to lose. Hold that close when things get dark, Sarah. Hold it very close. 52 hours later, the Emergency Collective Parliament convened on Lunar Base. The 12-member civilian government was presented with Admiral Chen's proposal: commit the entire Earth Defense Fleet to a military intervention in ethereal space in an attempt to stop the void entity before it reached human territory. The debate lasted 6 hours. Most of it was political theatre, grandstanding and fear-mongering from delegates who understood only that humanity was about to risk everything on the word of a military officer and a single intercepted message. But eventually, after the facts were laid bare and the numbers were run, the vote was called. 10 in favour, 1 abstention, 1 against. As the vote flashed across the screens, Sarah felt something shift in her chest. This was it. The moment when humanity stopped being the ignored children of the galaxy. This was when they stood up and said, "We matter, we exist. We will not be destroyed without fighting." The propaganda machine began immediately. Official statements were released to the Ethereal Collective, claiming that Earth's fleet was rushing to assist in the crisis. The statements were technically true, though they failed to mention that no one had asked for human help. The Ethereal's response, when it came 4 hours later, was almost dismissive. They acknowledged the gesture but suggested that human forces would be best utilized in support roles, which was their polite way of saying humanity should stay out of the way. Sarah read the message and threw her datapad across the war room. It shattered against the wall with a satisfying crash. "Get me a course to the Cascade Barrier," she ordered. "And somebody tell me the fastest way to get 200-plus ships across 3/4 of the galaxy without being seen, because we're about to teach the Ethereals a lesson in humility." As her fleet prepared to jump, Sarah stood once more at the window of Mercury Station, looking out at Earth. Somewhere down there, her sister was tending a garden. Her nephew was learning mathematics. Billions of people were going about their lives, unaware that the future of their entire species was about to be decided in the darkness between stars. She placed her palm against the cool glass. "Hold on," she whispered. "Help is coming!" And they have no idea what's about to hit them. Above Earth, the first wave of humanity's hidden fleet began charging their jump drives. The void entity was approaching, and the galaxy was about to learn that dismissing humanity had been the greatest strategic error in 3,000 years of recorded history. The jump took 12 minutes. To Sarah, standing in the command center of the flagship Unbroken, it felt like 12 centuries. Space folded in on itself with a sensation that no one who hadn't experienced it could adequately describe. The instruments showed the transition happening in perfect mathematical increments, but the human mind wasn't built to process the reality of moving through higher dimensions. Sarah kept her hands braced against the tactical console and focused on breathing steadily. Around her, her bridge crew did the same. Training could only carry you so far when you were literally bending the laws of physics. Then reality snapped back into place, and they emerged in the ethereal core system. The first thing Sarah noticed was the light, or rather, the absence of it. The second thing was that every alarm on her ship began screaming simultaneously. "Tactical report," she commanded, already moving toward the holographic display. The data was coming in faster than human eyes could process. Dozens of ships in distress, energy readings that exceeded all theoretical models, weapons fire being exchanged across a front that spanned a quarter of the solar system. Lieutenant Commander Jackson's hands flew across his console. His voice was steady despite the chaos. "We're in the ethereal system, ma'am. The ethereal main fleet is engaged with. Christ, I don't know what we're looking at. The sensor readings don't make sense. It's like the thing is made of void, like it's literally a hole in space that's moving and thinking and—" "Show me!" Sarah interrupted. The hologram shifted, and what appeared before her made even her military mind struggle to process the image. The void entity wasn't a ship. It wasn't even a creature, at least not in any conventional sense. It was a massive tear in the fabric of space itself, surrounded by a corona of distorted light that seemed to bend reality around it. Wherever it moved, stars flickered out of existence. Nebulae collapsed in on themselves. Space itself seemed to fracture, and it was systematically destroying everything the ethereals threw at it. A formation of ethereal dreadnoughts, massive vessels, each one the size of a small moon, were engaging the entity with weapon systems that could level planets. Their energy weapons carved through space with the fury of 1,000 suns. But nothing was hitting. The weapons fire passed into the entity's event horizon and simply vanished. Some of the ships had already been destroyed. 3 more were dying as Sarah watched, their hulls collapsing in on themselves as the entity's gravitational distortion field pulled them apart atom by atom. "This is worse than the legends suggested," Sarah breathed. "Ma'am?" Jackson was looking at her with the expression of someone trying to process an impossible situation. "What do we do? We can't fight that. Nothing can fight that." Sarah's mind was already running calculations. The entity wasn't invincible. Nothing was. It had destroyed civilizations, but those civilizations had fought it the way everything fought, with larger weapons, more ships, greater firepower, standard military doctrine applied to a threat that had no reason to expect anything except standard military responses. But humanity had been fighting with its back to the wall for 2 centuries. Humanity didn't fight with greater firepower. Humanity fought with cunning. "All ships execute formation divergent," Sarah ordered. "Scatter pattern Omega. I want our vessels spreading out across the system at maximum velocity. Full cloaking protocols. And get me tactical analysis on that gravitational distortion field. I need to know its refresh rate, its pattern, anything that isn't randomly chaotic." Around her, the war room suddenly shifted into a different kind of organized. The human fleet, 217 ships strong, began dispersing from their entry point. Instead of forming a traditional battle line, something the ethereals would immediately recognize, the human ships began a pattern that looked almost like random scattering. But it wasn't random. It was a tactic the humans had developed during the colony wars on Mars, back when they had limited resources and had to fight enemies with superior equipment. It was called the Hydra Protocol. Never attack the same target twice from the same direction. Never concentrate force in a way that allowed a superior enemy to respond with full force. Instead, keep them confused, off balance, forced to respond to threats from impossible angles. The ethereals' tactical officers were watching the human maneuver with visible confusion. In their messages, transmitted openly across all channels, they expressed bewilderment at humanity's strange positioning. A few questioned whether human ships were malfunctioning or if their crews were incompetent. Sarah ignored them all. She was focused on the gravitational readings, waiting for a pattern to emerge. "There!" Captain Ortega, still commanding from her tactical station on the flagship, pointed at a section of the hologram. "The distortion field. It operates on an 11.7-second cycle. The entity refreshes its gravitational distortion in a predictable pattern. There's a gap, ma'am. Not long, maybe 3 seconds. But it's there. 3 seconds. In naval combat at this scale, 3 seconds was either forever or a blink of an eye, depending on what you were trying to accomplish. Sarah began to see what Ortega was suggesting. "Begin cycling weapons online," Sarah commanded. "I want every ship in this fleet to plot a target solution for the entity. But hold fire! We're going to use the distortion gap, but we need to time it perfectly. 1 shot per ship delivered within a 2-second window. If we can synchronize, we'll hit it with 300 simultaneous weapons strikes." Ortega finished, her voice gaining strength. "It won't be able to distort them all away. Even if most of them fail, some will get through to actual damage." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. She opened a fleet-wide channel. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen. We are executing Operation Thunderstrike. Each vessel will prepare a single coordinated strike aimed at the entity's core. We attack only during the distortion refresh cycle. Time your shots to impact within the window I'm transmitting now. Deviation of more than 0.03 seconds and your shot will miss. This has to be perfect." Across the system, human ships began maneuvering into position. They weren't trying to outrun the entity. They weren't trying to overpower it with superior firepower. They were simply getting into position and waiting for the moment. The ethereals, watching this display, began transmitting demands that humanity stand down, that they weren't equipped for this battle, that they were going to get themselves and their allies killed with this foolish gesture. Sarah muted the communications channels. She had no time for politics. The entity continued its advance, methodically destroying ethereal ships that attempted to engage it directly. Entire squadrons were being erased from existence. The once mighty ethereal military, the force that had dominated galactic politics for 3,000 years, was being systematically dismantled. Sarah watched the countdown timer on her screen. 45 seconds until the distortion refresh cycle. 40 seconds. 35. The ethereals were issuing emergency evacuation orders now. Some of their ships were attempting to retreat, to fall back to defensive positions deeper in their own space. Sarah understood the impulse. She would have done the same with an enemy this overwhelming. 30 seconds. 25. 20. "Lock all weapons," Sarah commanded quietly. "On my mark." The human fleet, invisible to most sensors and scattered across an impossibly wide formation, had weapons trained on a single point in space. 217 ships, each one carrying weapon systems that were unconventional by galactic standards, precisely because humans had designed them without access to the mathematical frameworks that governed conventional military tech. 15 seconds. 10. The entity's corona flared, and the gravitational distortion suddenly relaxed. For 2.97 seconds, the thing that was eating ethereal civilization became slightly more vulnerable. "Fire!" Sarah screamed. The response was instantaneous. The human fleet erupted. 300 weapon strikes carved through the void, missiles using unconventional guidance systems, kinetic impactors designed to penetrate through distorted space-time, energy weapons built on principles that the ethereals had dismissed as primitive because they had never bothered to study what humans were actually creating. Half the weapons were distorted away or negated by the entity's defense. But in that brief window, enough got through. Enough struck something fundamental about the entity's structure. For the first time since the entity had emerged from beyond the galactic edge, it screamed. The sound wasn't audible, but every sensor in every ship registered it simultaneously. A wail of something that might have been pain, might have been rage, a cry that seemed to fracture the very bonds holding matter together. The entity convulsed, and suddenly its systematic methodical advance became frantic and chaotic. "Did we?" Jackson started, unable to complete the sentence. "Continue cycling," Sarah commanded, her voice cold as ice. "All ships rotate positions for secondary strikes. Use formation Hydra 5. I want us hitting from different angles on the next cycle. Keep it confused. Keep it reacting to us instead of adapting." And just like that, the battle transformed from a catastrophic loss for the ethereals into something that looked almost like a fair fight. The ethereal command, recovering from their shock, began to understand what was happening. They transmitted a message to Sarah that was almost respectful in tone. The ethereal admiral asked permission to form a coordinated defense with the human fleet. It was, Sarah reflected, probably the first time an ethereal had ever asked a human for anything except concessions or technological gifts. Sarah accepted the coordination proposal. Now, instead of the ethereals fighting alone and the humans launching independent strikes, The two forces began to function as an integrated unit. The ethereals provided numerical superiority and massive firepower. The humans provided tactical unpredictability and the ability to exploit windows the ethereals' traditional military doctrine couldn't even perceive. The entity screamed again. Then a third time, it began to retreat, falling back toward the edge of ethereal space. It moved faster now, as if it wanted to disengage, to escape back to whatever dimension it had originated from. "Pursuit pattern," Sarah commanded. "Don't let it regroup. Drive it back. This thing has destroyed civilizations. It's not escaping on our watch." Hour after hour, the battle continued. The human ships danced through the void, never engaging the entity directly, always attacking from unexpected angles during those brief 3-second windows. Each strike was carefully calculated, delivered with precision, and by the time the entity could adjust its defenses, the humans had already moved to new positions. The ethereals, watching this display of coordinated tactical genius from a species they had dismissed as unsophisticated, began to understand that they had been catastrophically wrong about humanity. Finally, after 6 hours of continuous combat, the entity's corona collapsed. The tear in space-time began to close, the distortion field guttering like a failing star. With a final wail that this time carried an unmistakable note of defeat, the entity retreated back beyond the galactic edge. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. "Report!" Sarah commanded, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Too calm, too distant. "Enemy contact lost," Jackson reported. "The entity has crossed the boundary. It's not coming back." Casualty report. Our losses. 31 ships destroyed, ma'am. Another 47 with significant damage. Casualties estimated at approximately 8,000 souls. Sarah closed her eyes. 8,000. 31 ships. The cream of humanity's military. Gone. It was the worst combat loss humanity had suffered in their entire recorded history. And at the same time, they had saved 3 trillion lives. The ethereals had confirmed that if the entity had reached their core system, civilization as the galaxy knew it would have ended. A message came through from the ethereal flagship. The ethereal admiral herself was transmitting, her voice something that might have been humility if ethereals could feel such things. "Human Admiral Chen," the message began, "the ethereal collective wishes to formally recognize the valor and tactical brilliance of the Earth Defense Fleet. You have saved not only the ethereal species but the entire galactic civilization. Your people have earned respect that no amount of diplomacy could have purchased. If humanity accepts, we would like to formally offer a seat on the Collective Council. And we would like to request assistance in understanding how to create your tactical systems, because nothing we have is comparable to what you have demonstrated." Sarah read the message twice, then began to laugh. Not the kind of laughter born from humor, but the kind that comes from the release of absolute tension. She was laughing because the ethereals had just asked for help. The ethereals who had patted human diplomats on the head were asking to learn from human innovation. "Respond to the ethereal admiral," Sarah said finally. "Tell her that Earth accepts the Collective Council seat. And tell her that humanity has been developing military innovation for 200 years while the rest of the galaxy was busy dismissing us. Maybe it's time everyone learned what we're actually capable of when we're taken seriously." She looked out at the holographic display of her damaged fleet. 31 ships that would never return home. 8,000 voices that would never speak again. But billions who would live because humanity had refused to accept the role the galaxy had written for them. "Begin recovery operations," she ordered. "We're bringing every one of our people home that we possibly can. And then Admiral Patterson and I are going to have a very long conversation about exactly how hard we pushed this fleet beyond their design specifications." As her crews began the grim work of recovery, Sarah realized something fundamental had changed. The galaxy's pecking order had just been entirely rewritten. And humanity, the species everyone had dismissed as irrelevant, had just proven themselves essential. The age of human ascension had begun. And no one, not even Sarah herself, could predict where it would lead. The celebration was muted, which was exactly as Sarah had requested. The ethereal collective wanted to throw parades. The Krell Empire wanted to sign treaties. Even the normally aloof merchant guilds were sending diplomatic envoys with offers of trade agreements and technological partnerships. But Sarah had ordered her fleet to Mars, where they could recover in relative peace while the rest of the galaxy came to terms with what had just happened. It took 3 weeks for the propaganda machine to fully shift. The same news networks that had called human military ambitions adorable were now describing the Earth Defense Fleet as the most innovative fighting force in galactic history. Analysts who had spent decades dismissing human technological development were suddenly scrambling to rewrite their assessments, and politicians across 100 different species began the delicate dance of figuring out how to relate to humanity without looking like they'd been wrong all along, which they had been, catastrophically so. Sarah was in the recovery bay of the Unbroken when General Patterson found her. The old man looked even more ancient than usual, and Sarah realized he'd probably been awake for the entire 6-hour battle and the subsequent chaos. His uniform was wrinkled, his silver hair was disheveled, and he had the expression of someone who had seen the future and wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. "We have a problem," Patterson said, settling into the chair next to Sarah's without waiting for an invitation. "Just one?" Sarah replied, though she already knew what he was going to say. "Well, a dozen, but one that's more important than the rest." Patterson pulled out a datapad and activated a holographic display. What appeared was a compilation of messages from every major power in the galaxy. Offers of military partnership, technology exchange, research collaboration, even a marriage proposal from the Stellar Collective's princess. But here's the real issue. They all want the same thing. They want us to build more ships like ours. They want us to teach them our tactical systems. They want us to franchise human military doctrine across the galaxy. Sarah understood the problem immediately. The moment humanity satisfied those requests, they would cease to be unique, the thing that had made them dangerous. Their unconventional approach, born from necessity and isolation, would become commodity technology. Every other species would simply absorb it, iterate on it, and within 2 decades the human advantage would be gone. "What's your recommendation?" Sarah asked, though she already suspected what it would be. "Don't share anything critical," Patterson said immediately. "We keep the core innovations classified. We sell them upgraded versions of what we're willing to let them have, but we hold back the real secrets. And we use this moment to change everything about humanity's position in the galactic economy and politics." Sarah nodded slowly. It was ruthless. It was also exactly right. Humanity had been the ignored underdog for 2 centuries. Now they had an unprecedented leverage point, and they would be foolish to waste it. "What do you need from me?" Sarah asked. "You need to go back to Earth and testify before Parliament," Patterson said. "You need to explain to the civilian government that this is our moment to fundamentally alter humanity's trajectory. Not through conquest. That would just make us the new tyrants, but through becoming indispensable. Strategic indispensability is the only real power that lasts." The hearing took place in Geneva, in the Parliament building that had been the heart of human government for 3,000 years. Sarah stood before the delegates of Earth's representatives and laid out the situation with brutal clarity. Humanity had saved galactic civilization. They had proven their military and tactical superiority. They had earned the respect of every major power, and now they needed to leverage that position carefully. She recommended establishing a military training academy that would accept cadets from species across the galaxy, but would teach only what humanity wanted them to know. She proposed creating independent human contractor fleets that would work for other species but would always answer to Earth's command structure. She suggested establishing human observation posts across ethereal space and beyond, ostensibly for security purposes, but really to build human influence into the political and military structure of the galactic community. Some delegates objected. The old isolationists who had always wanted to stay out of galactic affairs. The pacifists who argued that military power was inherently corrupting. The idealists who believed that sharing technology freely was the path to universal peace. But the vote was decisive. 193 in favor, 12 against. 5 abstentions. Humanity was going to play the long game. The transformation happened faster than anyone expected. Within 6 months, the first class of Human Military Academy had accepted cadets from 47 different species. The Ethereals sent their best young officers. The Krell sent their most promising tactical commanders. Even the isolationist Zenith Collective, who had never before acknowledged the need for military training, requested enrollment slots. The human instructors taught them the basics of conventional military doctrine, but they reserved the truly revolutionary concepts for later levels of training. Advanced students learned about Hydra protocol formations and the importance of unpredictable tactical patterns. They learned that numerical superiority was less important than adaptive thinking. They learned that the most powerful military force wasn't the one with the biggest weapons, but the one willing to question all the rules. Sarah was back on the bridge of the Unbroken when the first human contractor fleet launched. 50 ships, smaller than the core military vessels but equipped with the same revolutionary innovations, would operate independently under hire to various galactic powers who could afford their services. The contract with the Ethereals alone was worth more than Earth's entire previous GDP. "We're becoming mercenaries," Marcus Webb observed. He'd been promoted to captain and given command of one of the new contractor vessels. "I'm not sure how I feel about that." "We're becoming strategically essential," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference. We're not selling our loyalty. We're selling our expertise, and we're keeping our independence. The Ethereals could hire us today and lose our services tomorrow if we decided another contract was more interesting." That's power, Marcus. Real power. Not the kind that comes from having the biggest guns, but the kind that comes from being too valuable to lose. The months turned into years. The Human Military Academy became the most sought-after institution in known space. Graduation from the Human Academy became a credential that could launch a species' entire career into the highest levels of galactic military command. And because the humans carefully controlled what was taught, they essentially held veto power over strategic decisions across the entire galaxy. If they didn't want a military action to succeed, they could ensure it failed simply by not training the officers in the methods that worked. The Ethereals, initially humiliated by how badly they had been wrong about humanity, gradually became humanity's closest allies. The Ethereal admiral who had asked for help, a warrior named Cassandra who had commanded the defense at the entity barrier, became a personal friend of Sarah's. They would meet in neutral space on stations orbiting dead stars and discuss philosophy and military strategy for hours while their fleets waited in the darkness nearby. "My kind built this galaxy on the assumption that we understood everything," Cassandra said once during one of these meetings. "We had 3,000 years of history. We had seen empires rise and fall. We were certain that novelty had ceased to be possible. And then humanity appeared. And in 200 years of existence, they fundamentally rewrote the rules of reality." "We were just desperate," Sarah replied. "We had nothing else to lose, so we tried everything." "You all had so much to protect that you couldn't afford to experiment. Perhaps that is the lesson the galaxy needed," Cassandra said. "Perhaps survival belongs not to the powerful and established, but to those willing to burn everything down and rebuild it differently." 5 years after the battle at the ethereal core, Sarah stood at the window of Earth Station Prime, watching the Earth below. The planet had changed in that time. It was wealthier than it had ever been. Humanity had invested the profits from contractor fleets and military academy enrollment fees into infrastructure and development. Mars was being terraformed at an accelerated rate. The Moon had become a hub of manufacturing and research. And humanity, once the ignored child of the galaxy, was building something extraordinary. But Sarah's thoughts weren't on the economic transformation. She was thinking about the 31 ships that had been lost. She was thinking about the 8,000 voices that had been silenced. She was thinking about the weight that command carried, about the responsibility of being the person who made the decision that had sent people to their deaths. A notification appeared on her wrist display. It was from the Collective Council. The message was brief. Another anomaly had been detected near the galactic edge. There were whispers that the void entity's disappearance might not be permanent, that it might simply have been wounded, not destroyed, and they were requesting that the Earth Defense Fleet begin investigating, because no one in the galaxy trusted anything that touched the void except humanity. Sarah looked at the message for a long time. She was 63 years old. She had served in the military for 45 years. She had been promoted beyond her wildest ambitions. She had changed the course of galactic history. And now the galaxy was asking her to do it again. She accepted the commission. The fleet assembled over 3 weeks. New ships had been built, not to replace the ones lost, because nothing could do that, but to bolster humanity's strength. These new vessels incorporated even more advanced innovations, improvements developed over 5 years of refinement and testing. The military academy had produced brilliant officers from dozens of species, but the core of humanity's strength remained unchanged. The unconventional human mind, the willingness to try what no one else would, the ability to find solutions in impossible situations. As she watched the ships take formation, Sarah realized that this was just the beginning. The void entity was out there somewhere. The galaxy faced threats that they hadn't even discovered yet, and humanity, whether they wanted it or not, had become essential to the survival of galactic civilization. It wasn't a burden that Sarah had chosen, but it was one she would bear. The night before the fleet was scheduled to depart, Sarah received a visitor in her quarters. It was Marcus Webb, now a full captain and one of the most respected officers in the human military. He'd come to deliver a gift. A simple thing, really. A data crystal containing a message from the 8,000 crew members who hadn't come home from the entity battle. The messages had been recorded by families, friends, and fellow officers. They spoke of the fallen, of their sacrifice, of the meaning they had found in their service. One message was from the mother of a 19-year-old cadet who had died in the third hour of combat. She said that her son had died believing in something greater than himself, and that she was proud beyond measure. Sarah watched the messages until dawn, and when the sun rose over Earth, she was ready to lead humanity into whatever came next, ready to face the void, ready to continue the journey that had started 2 centuries ago when a single human ship had made contact with the galaxy and been dismissed as irrelevant. As the Earth Defense Fleet jumped to hyperspace, heading toward the edge of known space, Sarah transmitted one final message to Earth. It was simple, just a few words that would be recorded in the annals of human history. We are going into the darkness, but we do not go afraid. We do not go uncertain. We go as humans, adaptable, innovative, and absolutely certain that no force in the universe can break us. The galaxy dismissed us as insignificant. We have shown them their error, and we will continue to show it again and again, until the universe itself learns to fear the day humanity enters a fight. This is Admiral Sarah Chen, and we are not finished. The void received them, and for a moment, there was only darkness. Then, as if in response, the human fleet's engines flared to life, pushing them forward into the unknown. And somewhere in the galaxy, every intelligent species that had once laughed at humanity felt a chill run down their spine. They had made a critical error. They had believed that power came from what you inherited. They had not understood that true power came from what you were willing to build, no matter the cost. Humanity had learned that lesson through hardship and desperation, and now they were going to teach it to anyone foolish enough to underestimate them again. The age of humanity had truly begun, and no force in the known galaxy would ever be the same.